In the sleepy village of St. Mary Mead, a deadly secret hums beneath the iron gate of Hawthorne Manor, where groundskeeper Tom Harrow meets a shocking end, electrocuted by a tampered wire. Was it the manor's blustering owner, desperate to protect his crumbling estate? The nervous electrician, hiding a rushed job? The bitter neighbour, fueled by a grudge? Or the charming contractor, whose smile conceals ruthless ambition? Miss Jane Marple, with her sharp eyes and quiet wisdom, unravels a web of greed and deceit, where a single clue, tiny brass, screw holds the key to a killer's downfall. In a village where secrets never stay buried, one question burns: who turned the gate into a weapon? Chapter 1. The shocking incident. The village of St. Mary Mead lay nestled in a fold of the English countryside, its thatched cottages and winding lanes basking in the late summer haze of 1928. To the casual eye, it was a place of timeless calm, where the most pressing concerns were the vicar's sermons or the quality of Mrs. Price's jam at the church fete. But beneath this placid surface, as Miss Jane Marple well knew, currents of human passion and folly ran deep, ready to ripple into scandal or tragedy at the slightest provocation. On this particular morning, Miss Marple sat in her parlour, her nimble fingers guiding knitting needles through the creation of a pale blue shawl. The window before her framed a view of the garden, where roses nodded in the breeze, and beyond, the lane that led to the heart of the village. She was not alone. Her young maid, Lily, bustled in with a tray of tea, her face flushed with something more than the exertion of housework. "Oh, miss," Lily burst out, setting the tray down with a clatter. "Have you heard? It's dreadful. Tom Harrow, the groundskeeper at Hawthorne Manor, he's been killed. Electrocuted, they say, right by that great iron gate." Miss Marple's needles paused, hovering like delicate antennae sensing a disturbance, her mild blue eyes, deceptively gentle behind their spectacles, fixed on Lily. "Electrocuted, you say? How very shocking. Tell me everything, Lily, from the beginning." Lily, eager to share the village's freshest gossip, needed little prompting. "It was early this morning. Young Billy from the post office saw it all. He was cycling past the manor when he heard a cry full, he said, like a man in torment. He ran to the gate and there was Tom, all crumpled up, his hand still on the bars. Billy tried to pull him away, but the gate was humming, miss, like it was alive. He fetched Dr. Haydock, but it was too late. Tom was gone." Miss Marple set her knitting in her lap, her mind already turning over the details. Tom Harrow, a sturdy man in his 40s, had tended the grounds of Hawthorne Manor for years, his weathered hands as familiar with the soil as hers were with wool. Electrocution was no common accident, not in St. Mary Mead, where electricity was still a novelty, viewed with suspicion by many, and a gate that was curious indeed. "Was anyone else about?" Miss Marple asked, pouring tea with a steady hand. "At the manor, perhaps." Lily shook her head. "Not that Billy said, miss, but Sir Henry Caldwell, the manor's owner, he's in a right state, they say, shouting about trespassers and how the gate was meant to keep 'em out. Mrs. Finch, the housekeeper, told my cousin the police are there now. Inspector Craddock himself." Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. Inspector Craddock was a competent man, though prone to overlooking the subtleties of human nature, as policemen often were. She recalled a similar incident in the village years ago, when a faulty lamp had sparked a small fire at the vicarage. No one had died, but the whispers of sabotage had lingered. This, however, was no mere spark. A man was dead, and the circumstances suggested something far darker than mischance. "I think, Lily," Miss Marple said, rising with the quiet determination that belied her frail appearance. "I shall take a walk to Hawthorne Manor. The air will do me good, and I might pay my respects to Mrs. Finch. Poor Tom Harrow, such a tragedy." Lily, wide-eyed, bobbed a curtsy. "Shall I fetch your hat, miss?" "Yes, please, and my shawl, the green one, I think. It's a touch chilly today." As Lily scurried off, Miss Marple's thoughts drifted to Hawthorne Manor, a grand but faded estate on the village's edge, its iron gate a recent addition, much discussed in the local tea rooms. Sir Henry Caldwell, a man of bluff manners and uncertain temper, had installed it only weeks ago, citing prowlers and poachers, but an electrified gate, that was an extravagance, even for a man of Sir Henry's means. And Tom Harrow, loyal and unassuming, was not the sort to meddle with wires or machinery. Miss Marple stepped into the lane, her green shawl draped neatly over her shoulders, her step brisk despite her years. The village hummed with its usual rhythm, children playing by the duck pond, the blacksmith's hammer ringing in the distance, but there was an undercurrent of unease, a murmur of voices hushed by the weight of sudden death as she approached. The manor, the great iron gate came into view, its bars gleaming under the overcast sky. A silent sentinel now stained with tragedy. She paused, her sharp eyes taking in the scene. The gate stood ajar, cordoned off by a constable who looked barely old enough to shave. Beyond, the manor's gravel drive led to the imposing house, its windows dark and unwelcoming. A small crowd had gathered, villagers, curious and somber, whispering among themselves. Miss Marple recognized Mrs. Price, the jam maker, and Mr. Dobbs, the butcher, their faces etched with the peculiar blend of horror and fascination that sudden death always provoked. Miss Marple called a familiar voice. Inspector Craddock emerged from the manor's entrance, his notebook in hand, his expression one of weary professionalism. "I might have guessed you'd be here. Come to see the commotion." "Merely a walk, Inspector," she replied with a small smile. "But I confess, the news of poor Tom Harrow has unsettled me. Might I have a word with Mrs. Finch? I should like to offer my condolences." Craddock's eyes narrowed slightly, but he knew better than to dismiss her, of course. "She's inside, shaken but managing. Mind you, don't touch anything near the gate. It's a nasty piece of work." Miss Marple inclined her head, her gaze drifting to the gate once more. Even from a distance, she could see the wires clumsily attached, their insulation frayed in a way that spoke of haste or intent. A tiny glint caught her eye, a metal clip half buried in the mud near the gatepost, unnoticed by the bustling constables. She made no move to point it out, but filed it away in her mind, as she did all small things that others overlooked. As she stepped toward the manor, Miss Marple felt the familiar stir of intuition, honed by years of observing the quiet dramas of St. Mary Mead. A man was dead, a gate was electrified, and someone, somewhere, had a secret worth killing for. She thought of her old friend, Mrs. Bantry, who once remarked that village life was a microcosm of the world's sins. How right she was, Miss Marple mused, and how often those sins hid behind the most respectable of facades. Chapter 2. The scene of the crime. The sky over St. Mary Mead hung heavy with clouds, casting a pall over Hawthorne Manor as Miss Jane Marple approached its gates. The manor, a relic of grander days, stood at the edge of the village, its ivy-clad walls and mullioned windows exuding an air of faded nobility. Yet today it was not the manor's architecture that drew the eye, but the great iron gate, now a silent monument to tragedy, The death of Tom Harrow had sent ripples through the village, and Miss Marple, with her unerring instinct for the undercurrents of human behaviour, felt compelled to see the scene for herself. The gate loomed ahead, its black bars stark against the grey morning. A young constable, his face pale and earnest, stood guard, his hands fidgeting with the brim of his helmet. A small knot of villagers lingered at a respectful distance, their whispers forming a soft hum, like bees disturbed from their hive. Miss Marple recognized Mrs. Wicks, the postmistress, whose sharp tongue was matched only by her sharper curiosity, and old Mr. Pym, the retired schoolmaster, who nodded gravely as if death were a lesson he had long anticipated. She offered them a polite smile, her presence unremarkable to those who saw only a frail spinster in a green shawl. But her eyes were already scanning the ground, the gate, the air itself for clues the police might have missed. Inspector Craddock emerged from the Manor's drive, his overcoat flapping as he strode toward her. His face, lined with the weight of his duties, softened slightly at the sight of her. "Miss Marple," he said, tipping his hat, "I thought you might turn up. You've a nose for these things, haven't you? Merely a neighbourly concern." "Inspector," she replied, her voice mild but her gaze sharp. "Poor Tom Harrow was a good man. I thought I might offer a word to Mrs. Finch, if she's not too distressed." Craddock's lips twitched, as if he knew her visit was not entirely charitable. "She's inside, managing as best she can. But come, have a look at the gate if you must. It's a bad business, and no mistake." He gestured toward the iron structure, its bars gleaming dully under the overcast sky. "Mind you stay clear of the wires. We've cut the current, but it's still no place for meddling." Miss Marple nodded, her steps measured as she approached the gate. It was a formidable thing, taller than a man and twice as wide. It's intricate. Scrolls speaking of craftsmanship from a bygone era. But what caught her attention was the tangle of wires snaking along its base, their black insulation frayed and twisted, as if gnawed by some careless hand. A small wooden post nearby bore a crude warning sign. "Danger electric." The paint was fresh, the letters uneven, suggesting haste. She tilted her head, noting the muddy ground beneath the gate, churned by recent activity. A faint imprint. Quarter Arjar boot heel, deep and distinct, with a peculiar nick in its edge. Beside it, half hidden in the grass, lay a small metal clip, its silver surface glinting faintly. She made no move to touch it, but her mind catalogued its presence. A tiny piece in the puzzle of Tom Harrow's death. Craddock followed her gaze, though he seemed not to notice the clip. "It's no accident, I'm afraid," he said, his voice low. "The wires were tampered with, cut clean in places, and not by wear. Someone meant for that gate to be lethal. Tom must have grabbed it, and—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "Dr. Haydock says death was instant." Small mercy that Miss Marple's lips pursed, her thoughts drifting to a long-ago incident in St. Mary Mead, when a farmer's son had been shocked by a faulty milking machine. It had been carelessness then, not malice, but the principle was the same. Electricity was a silent, unforgiving force, easily turned to wicked ends. "Who installed the wiring, Inspector?" she asked, her tone conversational, as if discussing. "The weather, Albert Stokes, the village electrician," Craddock replied. "He swears it was sound when he finished, but Sir Henry pushed him to rush the job. Said he wanted the gates secure against trespassers. I've got my men checking work now, but it's a mess. Wires spliced wrong, insulation stripped. Could be sabotage, or just shoddy work." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes lingering on the gate's hinges, where a faint scratch marked the metal, as if something had been forcibly removed. "And Sir Henry, is he about?" Inside, barking orders and upsetting Mrs. Finch, Craddock said with a wry smile. "He's insisting it's a tragic mishap, but he's nervous, keeps pacing like a caged lion. You'll see for yourself if you go in." "I shall," she said, adjusting her shawl. "A word with Mrs. Finch will do us both good, I'm sure." She stepped past the constable, who tipped his helmet awkwardly, and made her way up the gravel drive. The manor loomed ahead, its stone facade weathered but proud, its windows reflecting the sullen sky. The air carried a faint tang of ozone, a reminder of the gate's deadly charge. Inside, the manor's hall was a cavern of oak and faded grandeur, its walls adorned with portraits of stern-faced Caldwells long gone. Mrs. Finch, the housekeeper, met Miss Marple at the door, her apron crumpled and her eyes red-rimmed. She was a stout woman in her 50s, with the weary competence of one accustomed to managing a difficult household. "Oh, Miss Marple," she said, her voice trembling. "It's kind of you to come. Such a dreadful thing, poor Tom, gone in a moment." There, Mrs. Finch," Miss Marple said, patting her arm. "A cup of tea, perhaps? It steadies the nerves." She followed the housekeeper to a small parlour, its furniture heavy with age and polish. As Mrs. Finch busied herself with the kettle, Miss Marple's eyes roamed the room, noting the faint dust on a sideboard, the slightly askew portrait of a Caldwell ancestor. Small signs, she thought, of a household under strain. "Tom was ever so loyal," Mrs. Finch said, setting out cups. "Worked here nigh on 20 years, rain or shine. Never a cross word, not even when Sir Henry was in one of his moods. And now this electrocuted, of all things." She shuddered, spilling a drop of tea. "That gate was Sir Henry's idea, you know. Said it'd keep out riffraff, but I told him, we've no such trouble in St. Mary Mead. Now look what's happened." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her expression one of gentle sympathy, though her mind was racing. The gate was new, then. And electrified, such an unusual choice. Mrs. Finch nodded vigorously. New, as of last month, Mr. Henry had Mr. Stokes. "Wire it up," said it was modern, like they do in London. Tom didn't like it, said it was unnatural, a gate that could kill. He'd check it every morning to make sure it was safe. And now her voice broke, and she dabbed her eyes with her apron. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to Tom Harrow, a man she'd seen often in the village, his cap pulled low as he trudged to the manor with his tools. He was not one for idle chatter, but his quiet observance had always struck her. She recalled a time at the church fete when Tom had noticed a child pocketing sweets, saying nothing but steering the boy gently back to his mother. A man who saw things, she thought, and perhaps saw too much. "Did Tom mention anything unusual?" she asked, her tone light. "About the gate, or perhaps visitors to the manor?" Mrs. Finch frowned, stirring her tea. "Well, now you mention it, he did say something odd last week. Said he'd seen Mr. Blake, that's the contractor, misspoking about near the gate one evening after dark." Tom thought it queer, seeing as Mr. Blake's here for the stables, not the gate. But he didn't make much of it. Tom wasn't one to stir trouble. Miss Marple's needles, had they been in her hands, would have clicked with satisfaction. Roland Blake, the contractor, was a name she'd heard in passing, a man with a reputation for charm and ambition. She filed away Mrs. Finch's remark, along with the boot print and the metal clip. "And Sir Henry," she prompted, "how has he taken it?" Mrs. Finch's lips tightened. He's all bluster, as usual. Says it's a tragedy, but he's more worried about the village talking than poor Tom's death. He's been snapping at everyone, me, Mr. Stokes, even Mrs. Dowling, the neighbour, when she came by yesterday to complain about the gate blocking her path. Sir Henry's not himself, miss, and that's the truth. Miss Marple nodded, her mind conjuring the image of Sir Henry Caldwell, a man whose temper was as much a part of the manor as its creaking floors. She recalled a village squire, years ago, whose loud protests had masked a guilty conscience over a stolen horse. Was Sir Henry hiding something, or was his agitation merely the shock of a death on his property? As Mrs. Finch prattled on about the manor's routines, Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the window, where the gate was just visible through the trees. The wires, the boot print, the clip. Tom's remark about Blakeage was a thread, delicate but strong, in the tapestry of this crime. She thought of a St. Mary Mead widow who had once poisoned a rival's tea. Her crime uncovered by a single misplaced hairpin. Small things, Miss Marple knew, could unravel the grandest schemes. "Thank you, Mrs. Finch," she said, rising. "You've been most helpful. I mustn't keep you from your duties." She stepped back into the hall, where the air felt heavier, as if the manor itself mourned its groundskeeper. Outside, Craddock was conferring with a sergeant, his notebook open to a page of hasty scrawls. Miss Marple approached, her expression one of innocent curiosity. "Inspector, might I ask if you've spoken to Mr. Blake, the contractor? I understand he was seen near the gate recently." Craddock raised an eyebrow, but his tone was indulgent. "You've been talking to Mrs. Finch, I see." "Yes, we'll have a word with Blake, and Stokes, and Mrs. Dowling, too. Sir Henry's given us a list of everyone who's been about the manor. But don't you go playing detective, Miss Marple. This is a matter for the police." "Of course, Inspector," she said, her smile disarming. "I wouldn't dream of interfering." But as she turned back toward the village, her mind was far from idle. The gate, with its deadly wires, was no accident, she was certain. Someone had turned it into a weapon, and Tom Harrow, with his quiet eyes and steady hands, had paid the price. She thought of the metal clip glinting in the grass, and the boot print with its nicked heel. Small things, yes, but in St. Mary Mead, as in life, it was the small things that told the truth. As she walked down the lane, the clouds parted briefly, casting a fleeting light on the manor's gate. Miss Marple paused, her shawl fluttering. In the breeze, she would return to her cottage, to her knitting and her tea, but her mind would not rest. The gate, the wires, the clip, the boot print, they were pieces of a puzzle, and Miss Marple was determined to fit them together. In St. Mary Mead, secrets were never buried deep, and she had a knack for digging them up. Chapter 3. The suspects assemble the drawing-room of Hawthorne Manor, with its high ceilings and heavy velvet curtains, carried the weight of old wealth. Though the frayed edges of the upholstery hinted at fortunes stretched thin, Miss Jane Marple sat primly on a chin-scovered chair, her hands folded in her lap, her green shawl draped neatly over her shoulders. The room was warm, almost stifling, with a fire crackling in the grate despite the mildness of the late summer day. Inspector Craddock had arranged for the manor's key figures to gather, ostensibly to clarify the events surrounding Tom Harrow's death, and Miss Marple, with her unassuming presence, had been permitted to linger, a courtesy extended to her as a respected village figure, but her mild eyes, flickering over the assembled company, missed nothing. Sir Henry Caldwell stood by the mantel, his broad shoulders squared, his face flushed with a mixture of indignation and unease. A man in his late 50s, with a mane of greying hair and a moustache that bristled with every forceful word. He dominated the room as much by his bluster as by his title. "This is a damned outrage," he declared, slapping a hand against the mantelpiece. Tom was a good man, but careless. Mark you, that gate was meant to protect the estate, not this. His voice faltered, and he turned to glare at the others, as if daring them to contradict him. Beside him, perched on a hard-backed chair, was Mr. Albert Stokes, the village electrician, a wiry man with thinning hair and fingers stained with ink and grease. He clutched a worn cap in his hands, twisting it as if it might anchor his nerves. His eyes darted to the floor, avoiding Sir Henry's gaze, and Miss Marple noted the faint sheen of sweat on his brow. "I did the job proper, sir," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "Checked it twice. I did. Can't think how it went. Wrong." His words carried the weight of repetition, as if he had been defending himself all morning. Across the room, near a window that overlooked the fatal gate, sat Mrs. Clara Dowling, the manor's neighbour. A widow of some means, she was a striking figure despite her years. Her sharp cheekbones, accentuated by a severe black dress, her grey hair pinned tightly in a bun. Her lips were pursed, her eyes glinting with a disapproval that seemed to encompass the entire room, "if you ask me," she said, her voice cutting like a shard of glass. "That gate was a folly from the start, blocking my right of way, causing all this trouble. Poor Tom deserved better." Her words were laced with venom, and Miss Marple wondered at the depth of her resentment. Lastly, lounging with studied ease in an armchair, was Mr. Roland Blake, the contractor. His tailored suit and polished shoes spoke of ambition beyond the village's usual bounds, and his smile, quick and disarming, seemed calculated to charm. He was younger than the others, perhaps in his early 30s, with dark hair slicked back and eyes that moved too quickly, taking the measure of the room. "A terrible loss," he said smoothly, his tone sympathetic but not overly so. "Tom was a fine worker. I only wish I'd known more about that gate's workings. Prevented this." Miss Marple listened, her expression one of polite attention, but her mind was weaving a web of impressions. Each of these for Sir Henry, Stokes, Mrs. Dowling, and Blake had a connection to the gate, and thus to Tom Harrow's death. She recalled a village dance some years ago, where a quarrel over a spilled drink had revealed hidden grudges among seemingly cordial neighbours. People, she knew, wore masks, and it was in moments like these, under the pressure of tragedy, that the masks slipped. Inspector Craddock, standing near the door, cleared his throat. "I've asked you all here to get a clearer picture of what happened," he said, his tone brisk but not unkind. "Tom Harrow's death was no accident. The gate's wiring was tampered with, deliberately so. I need to know your movements yesterday, and anything you can tell me about Tom or the gate, sir." Henry snorted, crossing his arms. "I was in my study all afternoon, working on estate matters. Tom came by around 4, said he'd checked the gate as usual. Nothing amiss, he said. I didn't go near it myself, haven't touched the blasted thing since Stokes wired it." His eyes flicked to the electrician, a challenge in them. Stokes flinched, his cap twisting tighter. "I was at my shop, Inspector, finishing a job for the vicarage. Didn't come near the manor yesterday. The gate was fine when I left it last week. Tested it myself, with my meter." His voice trembled, and Miss Marple noted the defensive hunch of his shoulders. Like a man expecting blame, Mrs. Dowling's lips curled slightly. "I was at home, as I always am in the afternoons. I did walk by the manor in the morning to speak to Sir Henry about that gate blocking my path to the village. He wasn't interested, of course. She shot Sir Henry a look of pure disdain. Tom was there, raking leaves. We spoke briefly. He agreed the gate was a nuisance. That was all. Blake leaned forward, his hands clasped casually. I was here in the morning, discussing the stables project with Sir Henry. Left around noon for a meeting in Much Benham. Didn't see Tom, though I waved to him from the drive. As for the gate, I'm no electrician wouldn't know a live wire from a dead one. He chuckled, but the sound fell flat, and Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly at his easy manner. Craddock jotted notes, his pencil scratching in the silence. Miss Marple, silent until now, spoke softly, her voice almost lost in the crackle. Of the fire, Mr. Stokes, when you wired the gate, did you work alone, or did anyone assist you? It's such a large task for one man. Stokes blinked, caught off guard. Well, miss, I did most of it myself, but Mr. Blake was about one day, asking questions about the setup. Said he was curious about modern fittings for the stables. I showed him the basics, nothing technical mind. Blake's smile didn't waver, but Miss Marple caught the brief tightening of his jaw. Just taking an interest, Miss Marple, he said. A contractor needs to know a bit of everything these days. She nodded, her expression serene, but her mind was alert. Blake's curiosity about the gate was a detail worth noting, especially given Mrs. Finch's mention of Tom seeing him near it after dark. She thought of a village carpenter who had once taken an interest in a rival's tools, only to be caught sabotaging them. Ambition, she knew, could twist curiosity into something darker, and you. Mrs. Dowling, Miss Marple continued, turning her gentle gaze to the widow. You mentioned speaking to Tom about the gate. Did he seem worried about it, or perhaps mention anyone else lingering near it? Mrs. Dowling's eyes narrowed, as if weighing the question. He was his usual self, quiet, polite. Said he'd talked to Sir Henry about the path, though I doubt he did. As for others, he didn't say, but I saw that electrician with the wires a few days ago. Looked nervous, if you ask me. Stokes bristled, his cap nearly tearing in his hands. I was checking the connections, as I'm paid to do. Nothing wrong with my work, Mrs. Dowling, and I'll thank you not to imply it. Enough, Craddock said, raising a hand. We'll sort out who did what. For now, I need to know if any of you saw anything unusual, anyone near the gate who shouldn't have been, or anything Tom said that struck you as odd. Sir Henry shrugged, his irritation palpable. Tom was reliable, but not one for chatter. He didn't say anything out of the ordinary to me. As for the gate, it was my idea, and I stand by it. If Stokes had done his job right, we wouldn't be here. Miss Marple's eyes flicked to Sir Henry, noting the defensive edge in his voice. She recalled a St. Mary Mead shopkeeper who had blustered loudly about a theft, only to be found hoarding the stolen goods himself. Was Sir Henry's insistence a shield for guilt, or merely the pride of a man who disliked being questioned? The room fell quiet, the only sound the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the window, where the gate stood like a grim sentinel. The boot print, the metal clip, Tom's observation of Blake, these were fragments, but they were beginning to form a pattern. She thought of the village seamstress who had once unraveled a scandal by noticing a single mismatched thread in a quilt. Small things, she reminded herself, could lead to great truths. Craddock closed his notebook with a snap. That's all for now. I'll need to speak to each of you again, so don't leave the village without informing me. Miss Marple, a word before you go." She rose, her movements slow but deliberate, and followed him to the hall. "You've got that look," Craddock said, half amused, half wary. "What's on your mind?" "Oh, nothing definite, Inspector," she said, her smile disarming. "But people are so very revealing when they think they're not being watched. Don't you find?" He chuckled, shaking his head. "You're a danger, Miss Marple. Keep your eyes open, but leave the policing to me." "Of course," she said. But as she stepped into the manor's drive, her mind was already at work. The gate, the wires, the suspect's each held a secret, and Miss Marple was determined to find the thread that tied them together. In St. Mary Mead, as in life, the truth was often hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone with the patience to see it. Chapter 4. The groundskeeper's life. The late summer sun filtered through the lace curtains of Tom Harrow's modest cottage, casting delicate shadows across the worn floorboards. Miss Jane Marple sat in a straight-backed chair, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her green shawl draped over the armrest. The room was tidy but sparse, with a scrubbed table, a few framed photographs, and a vase of wilting marigolds, evidence of a life lived simply but with care. Across from her, Ellen Harrow, Tom's widow, poured tea with hands that trembled only slightly, her face pale but composed. She was a woman of quiet strength, her brown hair streaked with grey, her eyes carrying the weight of fresh grief but no trace of hysteria. "Thank you for seeing me, Mrs. Harrow," Miss Marple said, her voice soft as the rustle of leaves outside. "I know this is a difficult time, but I wanted to offer my condolences." Tom was much respected in St. Mary Mead. Ellen nodded, setting the teapot down with a faint clink. "He was a good man, Miss Marple. Never one for grand talk, but he loved his work, loved the manor's grounds like they were his own. To think he's gone, and in such a way." Her voice caught, but she steadied herself, smoothing her apron. "It doesn't seem real." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mild gaze taking in the room's small details. A pair of Tom's boots by the door, still caked with manor soil. A gardening almanac on the shelf, its pages dogged. A photograph of Tom and Ellen, smiling on their wedding day, his arm around her with a gentleness that spoke of deep affection. She thought of a village baker, years ago, whose quiet habits had revealed a theft when his ledger showed missing flour. Tom Harrow, she suspected, was another such man, unassuming but observant, his life woven into the manor's rhythms. "I understand Tom was diligent about the gate," Miss Marple said, her tone conversational, as if discussing the weather. "It must have been a change, having such a modern contraption at the manor." Ellen's lips tightened briefly. "He didn't like it. Miss said it was unnatural. A gate that could bite like a snake. He'd check it every morning, poking at the wires with a stick, never his hands. He was careful, Tom was. Knew the grounds better than anyone, and the people too." Her eyes drifted to the window, where the manor's chimneys were just visible. Over the hedge, Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning over Ellen's words. Tom's care with the gate suggested he was no victim of carelessness, as Sir Henry had implied. She recalled the metal clip she'd seen near the gate, its silver glint, a silent witness, and the boot print with its nicked heel. Did Tom ever mention anything unusual about the gate? She asked gently. Or perhaps someone he saw near it, someone who seemed out of place. Ellen frowned, stirring her tea absently. "He did say something, now I think on it. Last week, he came home late, a bit troubled. Said he'd seen Mr. Blake, that contractor fellow near the gate, after dusk. Tom thought it odd, seeing as Mr. Blake's work is with the stables, not the gate. He said Blake was looking at the wires, like he was studying them. Tom meant to ask him about it, but... She paused, her fingers tightening on her cup. He never got the chance. Miss Marple's needles, had they been in her hands, would have paused midst. Roland Blake's name surfaced again, as it had in Mrs. Finch's account, a thread running through the fabric of this mystery. She thought of a village grocer who had once noticed a stranger lingering near his stockroom, only to discover a plot to spoil his goods. Tom Harrow, with his quiet watchfulness, might have seen something equally dangerous. Did Tom say anything else about Mr. Blake? She prompted, her voice as soft as ever. Ellen shook her head. Not much, miss, only that. He seemed too smooth, always smiling, like he wanted something. Tom didn't trust him, but he wasn't one to make a fuss. He'd just watch, you know, and tell me things later. He noticed a lot, working the grounds. Heard things, 2 conversations not meant for him. Miss Marple's eyes sharpened behind her spectacles. Conversations. Did he share any with you, perhaps about the manor or its visitors? Ellen hesitated, her gaze dropping to her hands. He didn't like to gossip, but he did mention Sir Henry arguing with Mrs. Dowling about the gate a few days back. She was cross about it, blocking her path to the village. Tom said she was sharp with Sir Henry, called him selfish, and once he overheard Mr. Stokes muttering about being rushed on the wiring job, saying Sir Henry wouldn't listen to warnings about safety. Tom felt sorry for him, said Stokes, seemed out of his depth. Miss Marple nodded, filing away these fragments. Sir Henry's temper, Mrs. Dowling's grudge, Stokes's unease, they painted a picture of a manor rife with tensions. And Tom Harrow, with his gardener's knack for blending into the background, had been perfectly placed to overhear them. She thought of a St. Mary Mead postman who had once stumbled on a blackmail scheme by delivering a letter to the wrong door. Tom's role at the manor, she suspected, had made him a silent witness to secrets, perhaps one worth killing to keep. Tom sounds like a man who saw more than he said, Miss Marple remarked, setting her cup down. Did he ever seem worried? As if something at the manor troubled him. Ellen's eyes filled, but she held herself steady. Not worried, exactly, but thoughtful, like he was puzzling something out. The day before he died, he said the manor wasn't what it used to be too. Many new faces, too many plans. He mentioned Mr. Blake again, said he'd seen him talking to Sir Henry in the study, all whispers and quick looks. Tom didn't like it, said it felt like plotting, but he laughed it off, said it was none of his business. Miss Marple's mind quickened, plotting, indeed. She recalled the invoice for wire she'd heard of in Stokes's shop, signed by Blake, not the electrician. Why would a contractor meddle in electrical supplies? And Tom's observation of Blake at the gate, combined with his unease about whispered talks, suggested a man who had stumbled on something dangerous. She thought of a village girl who had once overheard a servant's scheme to steal silver. Her silence bought with a threat. Had Tom's silence been insured by something far worse? You've been very kind to share this, Mrs. Harrow, Miss Marple said, rising with a gentle smile. Tom was fortunate to have you, and I'm sure he'd want you to take care of yourself now. If anything else comes to mind, you'll let me know. Ellen nodded, her expression grateful but wary. I will, miss. Thank you for coming. It helps, talking about him. Miss Marple stepped into the lane, the cottage door closing softly behind her. The village was quiet, save for the distant bark of a dog and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. As she walked, her thoughts turned over Ellen's words like pebbles in a stream. Tom Harrow had been no mere groundskeeper. He had been a watcher, a listener, his quiet presence a threat. To someone with a secret, Blake's name loomed large, but Sir Henry's temper, Mrs. Dowling's bitterness, and Stokes's nervousness could not be dismissed. She recalled the metal clip by the gate, the nicked boot print, and now Tom's remarks about Blake's nocturnal interest in the wires. Each was a piece of the puzzle, and Miss Marple felt the pattern growing clearer, though not yet complete. She paused by the churchyard, where the spire cast a long shadow across the gravestones. Tom Harrow would soon rest here, she thought, and the thought steeled her resolve. In St. Mary Mead, as in life, the quiet ones often saw the most, and their truths could not be silenced forever. Miss Marple adjusted her shawl and continued toward her cottage, her mind already tracing the next thread in the tangled web of Hawthorne Manor. Chapter 5. The electrician's tale. The narrow lane leading to Mr. Albert Stokes's workshop was lined with hawthorn hedges, their berries just beginning to redden in the late summer light. Miss Jane Marple walked with her usual measured step, her green shawl draped neatly over her shoulders, her eyes taking in the familiar sights of St. Mary Mead with an alertness that belied her unassuming air. The village was settling into its afternoon hush, but the air carried a faint buzz of unease, as if Tom Harrow's death had left a charge in the atmosphere, not unlike the fatal gate itself. Stokes's workshop, a squat brick building behind. His cottage was a jumble of wires, tools, and half-finished projects. The door stood ajar, and Miss Marple paused at the threshold, peering into the dim interior. The scent of solder and oil greeted her, mingling with the faint tang of ink from a cluttered desk in the corner. Mr. Stokes was bent over a workbench, his thin frame hunched, his hands busy with a coil of copper wire. He started at the sound of her gentle knock, his head jerking up, his eyes wide with the wariness of a man expecting trouble. "Miss Marple," he exclaimed, setting down his pliers with a clatter. "Didn't expect you here. Come in, come in. Mind the cables on the floor." He gestured to a stool, wiping his hands on a rag that left smudges of grease on his already stained fingers. "Thank you, Mr. Stokes," she said, settling herself with the grace of one accustomed to making herself at home in any setting. "I hope I'm not interrupting. I was passing by and thought I might have a word about poor Tom Harrow. Such a tragedy, and so unexpected." Stokes's face tightened, his fingers resuming their nervous fidgeting with the rag. It's awful. Miss Tom was a decent sort, never caused me no bother. Can't think how it happened. My work was sound, I swear it." His voice carried a defensive edge, as if he anticipated blame before it was spoken. Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of gentle sympathy, though her mind was as sharp as the needles in her knitting bag. She recalled the gate's frayed wires, the metal clip glinting in the grass, and Ellen Harrow's mention of Tom seeing Stokes muttering about rushed work. The gate was quite a modern undertaking, she said, her tone conversational. It must have been a challenge, wiring such a thing. Did you manage it all yourself? Stokes hesitated, his eyes darting to the workbench, where a jumble of tools lay scattered. Mostly, Miss, it was a big job, no doubt. Sir Henry wanted it done quick, said he needed the estate secure, what with talk of poachers and such. I told him it'd take time to do it proper, but he wouldn't hear it. Kept pushing, he did, saying he'd not pay for delays. Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly, a gesture so subtle it might have been missed by anyone less observant than she. Sir Henry's impatience was a recurring note, one she had heard from Mrs. Finch and now Stokes. She thought of a village tailor who had once rushed a dress for a demanding client, only to have the seams unravel under scrutiny. Haste, she knew, often hid other motives. And the wiring itself, she continued, it was all your own work. No one else handled the materials. Stokes's fingers stilled, and he looked at her sharply, as if sensing a trap beneath her mild tone. Well, I ordered the wire and fittings myself, from a supplier in Much Benham. But now you mention it, Mr. Blake did bring some extra wire. One day, said he'd picked it up for me, to save time. I thought it odd, him being a contractor, not an electrician, but I used it. Seemed fine, same gauge and all. Miss Marple's eyes brightened, though her face remained serene. The invoice for wire, signed by Blake, flashed into her mind a detail she had overheard in Stokes's shop, now confirmed by his own words. Why would a contractor procure electrical supplies? She recalled a St. Mary Mead blacksmith who had once been duped into using faulty iron by a rival, a small act of sabotage that cost him a contract. That was kind of Mr. Blake, she said, her voice as gentle as ever. Did he often take such an interest in your work? Stokes shifted, uncomfortably, his cap now a crumpled ball in his hands. Not often, miss, but he was curious about the gate. Asked a lot of questions how the current worked, what had happened if the insulation failed. Said it was for his own projects, learning the trade, like I showed him the basics, nothing too deep. He's a quick one, Mr. Blake, always asking, always smiling. Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts racing. Blake's curiosity, noted by both Tom and Stokes, was no idle interest. She pictured the gate, its wires deliberately frayed, and the boot print with its nicked heel, which she suspected matched Blake's polished shoes. Her mind drifted to a village schoolteacher who had once questioned a pupil's forged note, only to uncover a larger deception. Small inquiries, she knew, could lead to great revelations. Did Tom ever speak to you about the gate? She asked, tilting her head slightly. I understand he checked it daily, being so careful. Stokes's face softened, a flicker of regret crossing his features. Aye, he did. Tom was thorough, always poking about with that stick of his. He asked me once if the gate could be made safer, said it made him uneasy. I told him it was as safe as I could make it, given Sir Henry's rush. Last time we spoke, he said he'd seen someone near the gate at night, not me, mind. Didn't say who, but he looked troubled, like he'd seen something he shouldn't. Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her expression remained unchanged. Tom's troubled look, his sighting of someone likely Blakeney at the gate, echoed Ellen's account. She thought of a St. Mary Mead gardener who had once noticed a stranger tampering with a gatepost, his quiet report foiling a theft. Tom's vigilance, it seemed, had made him a danger to someone with a secret. And you, Mr. Stokes, she said softly, did you ever notice anything odd about the gate after you finished it? Anything tampered with, perhaps? Stokes's eyes widened, and he leaned forward, his voice dropping. Now you mention it, miss. I did go back a few days ago, after Tom mentioned it, looking off. Found a wire loose, not how I left it. I fixed it, but I didn't think much of it, thought maybe the weather or a fox had got at it. But now, with Tom gone, he trailed off, his face pulling. You don't think someone did it on purpose, do you? Miss Marple's smile was gentle, but her mind was sharp as a tack. Oh, I'm sure the police will sort it out, she said, rising from the stool. "You've been most helpful, Mr. Stokes. I mustn't keep you from your work." As she stepped out into the lane, the workshop's door creaking shut behind her, Miss Marple's thoughts were a whirl of connections. Stokes's rushed job, Blake's unexpected supply of wire, Tom's sighting of a figure at the gate. These were no mere coincidences. She recalled the metal clip by the gate, its silver glint a silent accusation, and the invoice signed by Blake, a contractor with no business handling wires. Her mind turned to a village chemist who had once mixed a wrong prescription, his error traced to a rival's interference. Was Blake's involvement with the gate a similar act of meddling, with far deadlier intent? The sun was dipping lower, casting long shadows across the lane. Miss Marple adjusted her shawl, her step as steady as ever, but her mind was far from calm. Tom Harrow had seen something, or someone, that cost him his life, and the threads of this mystery were beginning to weave together. In St. Mary Mead, as in life, the smallest details, a clip, a wire, a whispered doubt could unravel the darkest secrets, and Miss Marple was determined to follow them to their source. Chapter 6. The neighbours grudged. The late afternoon light filtered through the elms lining Mrs. Clara Dowling's garden, casting dappled shadows across a lawn as meticulously kept as her reputation for sharp words. Miss Jane Marple approached. The widow's cottage, a neat brick affair with roses climbing the walls, their scent mingling with the faint dampness of an approaching evening. The village of St. Mary Mead was settling into its familiar quiet, but Miss Marple's mind was anything but still, turning over the threads of Tom Harrow's death, the frayed wires, the metal clip, the nicked boot print, and the troubling mentions of Roland Blake's presence near the gate. Mrs. Dowling had invited her for tea, an invitation extended with the brisk formality of one who rarely entertained but felt obliged to do so. Miss Marple, with her green shawl draped over her shoulders and her step as measured as ever, knocked lightly on the door. It opened promptly, revealing Mrs. Dowling in her severe black dress, her grey hair pinned tightly, her face a study in controlled displeasure. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice crisp as autumn leaves, "do come in. I suppose you're here about that dreadful business at the manor." "Indeed, Mrs. Dowling," Miss Marple replied, her tone gentle but her eyes alert. "I thought a chat might be a comfort, with the village so unsettled by poor Tom Harrow's death." Mrs. Dowling's lips thinned, but she gestured to a parlour that was as austere as its owner. The room was filled with gaudy ornaments, porcelain, shepherdesses, gilded clocks, a velvet footstool that seemed at odds with the widow's Spartan demeanour. Miss Marple settled into a chair, noting the faint dust on a side table, a sign of a household maintained more for appearances than for warmth. Mrs. Dowling busied herself with a silver tea service, her movements precise but betraying a flicker of agitation. "It's a terrible thing," Mrs. Dowling said, pouring tea with a steadiness that belied her sharp tone. "Tom was a decent man, always polite when I passed him on the manor grounds. But that Gateser, Henry's folly, I call it, has been nothing but trouble, blocking my path to the village, forcing me to tramp through mud or go the long way round. I told him it was an outrage, but he wouldn't listen." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her expression one of sympathetic interest. "It must be most inconvenient," she said. "I understand you spoke to Sir Henry about it. Did Tom share your feelings on the matter?" Mrs. Dowling's eyes glinted, a spark of indignation flaring. "He did, miss. Tom was a sensible sort. Not like that blustering fool, Caldwell. He said the gate was a danger, all those wires and warnings. We talked about it just a few days ago, when I met him raking leaves near the drive. He promised to speak to Sir Henry, to see if the path could be reopened. Not that I expected much. Sir Henry cares for nothing but his own pride. Miss Marple nodded, her mind cataloguing the widow's bitterness. Mrs. Dowling's resentment was palpable, a grudge rooted in more than a blocked path. She recalled a St. Mary Mead spinster who had once sabotaged a neighbour's fence over a disputed garden boundary, her spite cloaked in righteous indignation. Could Mrs. Dowling's anger have driven her to tamper with the gate? Her frail frame and fastidious nature seemed ill-suited to handling wires. But Miss Marple knew better than to judge by appearances alone. "Tom must have been a great help to you," she said, setting her cup down. "Did he mention anything else about the gate, or perhaps others who took an interest in it?" Mrs. Dowling's fingers tightened on her teacup, her gaze sharpening. "He didn't say much, but he did mention seeing that contractor Mr. Blake near the gate one evening. Said it was odd, him being there so late, poking about like he owned the place. I told Tom he should report it, but he just shrugged, said it wasn't his place to stir trouble. Poor man, if he'd spoken up, he might still be here." Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her face remained serene. Blake's name surfaced yet again, a persistent thread in the tapestry of this crime. Tom's observation, echoed now by Mrs. Dowling, Ellen Harrow, and Stokes, painted a picture of a man whose interest in the gate was far from innocent. She thought of a village shopkeeper who had once noticed a customer lingering too long near the till, his curiosity masking a plan to steal. "Mr. Blake does seem to be everywhere," she remarked lightly. "Did you ever see him near the gate yourself?" Mrs. Dowling's lips curled slightly, a gesture that might have been a smile or a sneer. "Once or twice, miss, when I passed by the manor, always with that charming smile, as if he could talk his way out of anything. I don't trust men like that, too smooth, too eager. And Sir Henry's taken with him, talking of grand plans for the stables. More fool him, I say." Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts drifting to the invoice for wire signed by Blake, and Stokes's account of the contractor's questions about the gate's wiring. Mrs. Dowling's distrust added another layer, suggesting Blake's charm was a facade that grated on those less susceptible to it. She recalled a St. Mary Mead curate who had once been swayed by a glib newcomer, only to discover a swindle too late. Was Sir Henry similarly blinded, or was there more to his faith in Blake? And Sir Henry, Miss Marple ventured, her tone as gentle as a summer breeze, he must be quite upset by this tragedy. "Did you notice anything in his manner when you spoke about the gate?" Mrs. Dowling snorted, setting her cup down with a clink. "Upset? He's more concerned with his reputation than Tom's death. When I went to him last week, he was all bluster, saying the gate was his right as lord of the manor. I told him it was a hazard, that someone would get hurt, but he waved me off, said I was meddling in his affairs. Meddling." Her voice rose, then fell abruptly, as if she regretted the outburst. Tom was there, heard it all. He looked uneasy, but he didn't say a word. Miss Marple's mind ticked over this detail. Tom, the silent observer, had witnessed a heated exchange, one that might have revealed more than Mrs. Dowling intended. She thought of the boot print near the gate, its nicked heel a silent clue, and wondered if Mrs. Dowling's anger could have driven her to action. However unlikely her frail hands seemed for such a task. "You must feel very strongly about the path," she said softly. "It's such a personal matter, these disputes between neighbours." Mrs. Dowling's eyes narrowed, but she nodded. "It's not just the path, Miss Marple, it's the principle. Sir Henry thinks he owns the village, but I've lived here longer than he has, and I'll not be pushed about. Tom understood. He was one of us, not like those newcomers with their schemes. Miss Marple smiled, her expression one of quiet understanding. But her thoughts were racing. Mrs. Dowling's pride, her sense of entitlement to the path, was a motive of sorts, but the technical skill required to tamper with the gate seemed beyond her. Yet her mention of Tom's unease and her disdain for Blake added weight to the growing suspicion around the contractor. She recalled a village widow who had once spread rumors to ruin a rival, her words a weapon as sharp as any knife. Could Mrs. Dowling's bitterness have found a different outlet? "Thank you for the tea, Mrs. Dowling," Miss Marple said, rising with her usual grace. "You've been most kind to share your thoughts. I'm sure the police will get to the bottom of this." Mrs. Dowling's lips twitched, as if she doubted the police's competence. "I hope so, miss, for Tom's sake, if nothing else." As Miss Marple stepped into the garden, the air cool against her face, she paused to admire a rose, her mind far from the blooms. Mrs. Dowling's grudge, Tom's observations, Blake's lingering presence, these were pieces of a puzzle, each fitting into a pattern she could almost see. The gate, with its deadly wires, was no accident, and Tom's death was a price paid for someone's secret. She thought of the metal clip, the invoice, the boot print, and now Mrs. Dowling's sharp words about Blake and Sir Henry in St. Mary. Mead, as in life, grudges could fester into something far darker, and Miss Marple was determined to uncover the truth before another thread snapped. Chapter 7. The owners burdened the grand study of Hawthorne Manor, with its dark oak panelling and shelves heavy with leather-bound volumes, seemed to absorb the light of the late afternoon, casting long shadows across the Persian rug. Miss Jane Marple sat in a high-backed chair, her green shawl folded neatly over her arm, her posture as unassuming as ever. Yet her eyes, bright and keen behind her spectacles, missed nothing, not the faint tremor in Sir Henry Caldwell's hand as he lit a cigar, nor the way his gaze darted to the window, where the iron gate stood like a grim sentinel in the distance. The air was thick with the scent of tobacco and old wealth, but there was an undercurrent of unease, as if the room itself held its breath after Tom Harrow's death. Sir Henry stood by the fireplace, his broad frame dominating the space, his moustache bristling as he puffed on his cigar. He was a man in his late 50s, with the ruddy complexion of one who preferred action to reflection. Yet today his bluster seemed tinged with something less certain, nervousness, perhaps, or guilt. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice booming, but not unkind, "it's good of you to call, though I can't think why you'd trouble yourself with this sorry business. A tragic accident, that's all it was. Poor Tom careless, but a good worker." Miss Marple inclined her head, her expression one of gentle deference, though her mind was as sharp as the knitting needles she had left at home. "Indeed, Sir Henry," she said softly, "it's a great loss to the village. I thought a word with you might shed light on Tom's last days to ease the minds of those who knew him." Sir Henry snorted, sending a plume of smoke into the air. "Not much to shed light on, I'm afraid. Tom did his job, kept the grounds tidy, never complained. That gate business, well, it was my idea, I'll admit. Needed to keep out trespassers, you know, too many strangers about these days." His eyes narrowed, as if daring her to question his judgment. Miss Marple nodded, her hands folded in her lap. She recalled the gate's frayed wires, the metal clip in the grass, and the boot print with its nicked heel details that suggested no accident. Sir Henry's insistence on carelessness rang hollow. much like a St. Mary Mead squire who had once dismissed a stolen horse as a prank, only to be found hiding it in his own stable. The gate was quite an undertaking, she said, her tone conversational. I understand you were keen to have it electrified quickly. It must have been a weighty responsibility, ensuring its safety. Sir Henry's cigar paused midway to his mouth, and he shot her a sharp glance. Responsibility. That was Stokes's job, not mine. I paid him to wire it properly, and he swore it was sound. If anyone's to blame, it's him for botching it. His voice rose, but there was a tremor beneath it, a crack in his usual bravado. Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly, a gesture so subtle it might have passed unnoticed. She thought of Stokes's nervous insistence that his work was sound, and the invoice for wire, signed by Roland Blake, a contractor with no business in electrical matters. Sir Henry's quickness to blame Stokes suggested more than irritation, a need to deflect scrutiny. And Tom, she continued, did he ever express concerns about the gate? I hear he was very thorough in his checks. Sir Henry waved a hand, as if dismissing a fly. Tom was always poking about, stick in hand, muttering about this or that. Said the gate made him uneasy, but I told him it was modern, necessary. He didn't argue, never did. Loyal man, Tom, but not one for big ideas. His tone softened briefly, then hardened again. If he'd been more careful, he'd be alive now. Miss Marple's eyes drifted to the desk, where a stack of papers lay in disarray, a ledger half open beside a glass of whiskey. She recalled Ellen Harrow's mention of Tom overhearing Sir Henry and Blake in hushed conversation, and Mrs. Dowling's account of Sir Henry's dismissal of her complaints. I understand Mr. Blake has been a frequent visitor, she said, her voice as gentle as a summer breeze. His plans for the stables must be quite ambitious. Sir Henry's face darkened, and he set his cigar in an ashtray with a force that betrayed his unease. Blake's a sharp fellow, knows his business. The stables need work falling apart. They are, and he's offered a fair price. Better than the others, I'll say that. We've had a few talks, nothing more. His words were clipped, as if he wished to close the subject. Miss Marple nodded, her mind quickening. Blake's name, woven through every conversation, carried a weight that could not be ignored. Tom's sighting of him near the gate, Stokes's account of his curious questions, and now Sir Henry's defensiveness when his name arose, all pointed to a man whose influence extended beyond his contract. She thought of a St. Mary Mead merchant, who had once been swayed by a charming supplier, only to discover inflated costs hidden in fine print. Was Sir Henry's trust in Blake a similar misjudgment, or something more? Did Tom ever mention seeing anything unusual about the gate? She asked, tilting her head slightly. Perhaps someone lingering near it, or anything out of place. Sir Henry frowned, his fingers drumming on the mantel. Not to me, he didn't. Though he did say once he'd seen someone near the gate after hours, didn't say who. I told him to mind his own work and leave the gate to Stokes. Probably just a villager cutting through, though with that Dowling woman harping on about her path, who knows? His tone carried a hint of scorn, but his eyes flicked to the window again, as if the gate itself accused him. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to Mrs. Dowling's bitterness, a motive that seemed too petty for murder, yet not impossible, she recalled. The metal clip, the boot print, and Tom's troubled remarks about Blake's nocturnal presence. Sir Henry's evasion, his quickness to blame others, suggested a man with something to hide, perhaps not guilt, but a fear of exposure. She thought of a village doctor who had once covered up a mistake by pointing fingers at his nurse. His bluster a shield for his own failings. "You've had much to contend with, Sir Henry," she said, rising with her usual grace. "The manor, the gate, now this tragedite, must weigh heavily." "I shan't take more of your time," Sir Henry grunted, retrieving his cigar. "Good of you to come, Miss Marple. Tell the village it's a sad business, but we'll get to the bottom of it. The police are handling things." His words were firm, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt, as if he feared what the police might find. As Miss Marple stepped into the manor's hall, the air cooler and less oppressive, she paused to adjust her shawl. The study's heavy atmosphere lingered in her mind, as did Sir Henry's unease. His insistence on Tom's carelessness, his defensiveness about Blake, his quickness to blame Stokesdees were not the actions of a man at ease with his conscience. She recalled the ledger on his desk, its pages disordered, and wondered if financial strain lay beneath his bluster. The gate, the stables, Blake's contractual were costly, and Sir Henry's temper might mask a deeper worry outside. The manor's drive was quiet, the gate still cordoned off by a constable. Miss Marple's gaze lingered on it, the wires, now lifeless but no less sinister. The threads of this mystery: Blake's ambition, Stokes's rushed work, Mrs. Dowling's grudge, and Sir Henry's agitation were weaving together, but the pattern was not yet complete. She thought of a St. Mary Mead widow who had once hidden her debts behind a facade of respectability, her secret uncovered by a single unpaid bill. Small things, Miss Marple knew, could unravel great deceptions, and she was determined to find the one that held the key to Tom Harrow's death. Chapter 8. The Contractor's Charm. The Red Lion, St. Mary Mead's sole public house, was a haven of warmth and chatter as the evening settled over the village. Its low beams and polished bar gleamed under the soft glow of oil lamps, and the air carried the mingled scents of ale, pipe smoke, and the faint lavender of Mrs. Tuttle's cleaning efforts. Miss Jane Marple, an infrequent visitor to such places, stepped inside with her usual composure, her green shawl draped neatly over her shoulders. She had heard from Lily, her maid, that Roland Blake, the contractor, was often seen at the Red Lion, holding court with his easy smile and ready coin. With Tom Harrow's death casting a shadow over the village, Miss Marple felt a visit might yield insights no manor drawing-room could provide. The pub was lively but not crowded, with farmers and shopkeepers clustered around tables, their voices a low hum of village gossip. Miss Marple spotted Blake at once, leaning against the bar, a pint in hand, his tailored suit a touch too fine for the rustic setting. His dark hair was slicked back, his eyes bright with the confidence of a man who knew how to charm. He was laughing with Mr. Tuttle, the publican, but his gaze flicked to the door as Miss Marple entered, registering her presence with a fleeting calculation before his smile widened. "Miss Marple," he called, his voice warm as he waved her. "Over an unexpected pleasure. Care for a lemonade? Mrs. Tuttle makes a fine one." His manner was all ease, but Miss Marple's sharp eyes caught the slight tightening of his fingers around his glass, a ripple in his polished surface. "Thank you, Mr. Blake," she said, settling onto a stool with the grace of one accustomed to any setting. "A lemonade would be lovely. I thought I might find you here, and I wished to offer my sympathies about poor Tom Harrow. Such a shock for everyone at the manor." Blake's smile held, but his eyes flickered, as if weighing her words. "Terrible business," he agreed, signaling Mrs. Tuttle for the lemonade. Tom was a good sort, always busy about the grounds. "I can't imagine how it happened. Gates like that aren't my line, you know. I'm just the stables man." He chuckled, but the sound was hollow. And Miss Marple noted the way he glanced at the door, as if expecting interruption. She sipped her lemonade, her expression one of mild interest, though her mind was as keen as ever. Blake's name had surfaced. In every conversation, Tom's sighting of him near the gate, Stokes's account of his curious questions, Mrs. Dowling's distrust, and Sir Henry's guarded defence. The invoice for wire, signed by Blake, and the metal clip by the gate loomed large in her thoughts, as did the nicked bootprint she suspected matched his polished shoes. "You must be very busy with the stables project," she said, her voice soft. "Sir Henry speaks highly of your plans. Quite ambitious, I hear." Blake leaned back, his smile broadening. "Oh, Sir Henry's a visionary, Miss Marple. The manor stables are a disgrace, rotting beams, leaking roofs. I've got plans to make them the finest in the county, and at a price that suits Sir Henry's purse. It's a big job, but I'm the man for it." His tone was confident, almost boastful, but Miss Marple caught a flicker of calculation in his eyes, as if he were gauging her reaction. She nodded, her thoughts drifting to a St. Mary Mead carpenter who had once undercut rivals to win a contract, only to be caught using shoddy materials. Ambition, she knew, could lead to corners cut and secrets buried. "It must take a great deal of planning," she said, tilting her head. "I understand you were seen near the gate recently, perhaps inspecting the grounds for your work. Let's..." Smile faltered, just for a moment, before he recovered with a laugh. "Inspecting, yes, you could say that. I like to get a feel for the whole estate. You know, helps with the big picture. I was near the gate one evening, checking the lay of the land. Didn't touch the wires. Mind you, electricity's not my game." His voice was smooth, but his fingers tapped the bar, a restless rhythm that belied his ease. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly, though her smile remained gentle. Tom Harrow had seen Blake near the gate after dark, a detail echoed by Mrs. Dowling and hinted at by Stokes. She recalled the metal clip, its silver glint a silent witness, and the invoice for wire that Blake had no business procuring. "Of course," she said, "but it's curious, isn't it, how much interest the gate has drawn. Tom seemed to think it was unusual, seeing you there so late." Blake's hand stilled, and his eyes met hers, a flash of wariness crossing his face before he masked it with another smile. "Tom was a watchful sort, wasn't he? Probably saw me wandering and thought I was up to no good, just a contractor's curiosity, Miss Marple, nothing more." He took a sip of his pint, his movements deliberate, as if buying time. Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. Blake's charm was a polished tool, but beneath it lay a tension that spoke of secrets. She thought of a village swindler who had once used his easy manner to deflect suspicion, only to be undone by a single misplaced receipt. Blake's presence near the gate, his questions to Stokes about wiring, his whispered talks with Sir Henry suggested a man with more than stables on his mind. "You must know the manor well by now," she said, her tone as light as ever. "Did Tom ever mention anything to you about the gate, or perhaps overhear something that troubled him?" Blake shrugged, his smile unwavering but his eyes cautious. "Not to me, miss. Tom kept to himself, mostly. If he heard anything, he didn't share it. A shame, really, if he'd spoken up. Maybe we'd know what went wrong with that gate." His words were smooth, but Miss Marple caught the slight edge in his voice, as if he were testing her knowledge. She sipped her lemonade, her thoughts turning to the pattern emerging from the threads of this case. Blake's ambition, his unexplained interest in the gate, and Tom's observations painted a picture of a man whose charm masked a deeper purpose. She recalled the boot print near the gate, its nicked heel, a detail she intended to confirm, and the invoice for wire, a clue that tied Blake to the crime's mechanics. Her mind drifted to a St. Mary Mead grocer who had once been caught tampering. With scales to inflate profits, his genial manner a cover for greed. Was Blake's charm a similar facade, hiding a motive tied to the lucrative stables contract? "You've been most kind, Mr. Blake," Miss Marple said, rising with her usual grace. "I mustn't keep you from your evening. The village is grateful. For your work at the manor, I'm sure." Blake's smile returned, full and easy. "A pleasure, Miss Marple. Drop by any time you fancy a chat." But as she stepped into the cool evening air, Miss Marple felt his eyes on her, a weight that lingered until she turned the corner. The village was quiet now, the red line's lights fading behind her. Miss Marple adjusted her shawl, her mind weaving together the threads of Blake's charm, his presence at the gate, and Tom's untimely death. The metal clip, the invoice, the boot print, these were small things. But in St. Mary Mead, as in life, small things could unravel the grandest schemes. She thought of Tom, the quiet watcher, and the secret he had taken to his grave. Blake's polished exterior was cracking, and Miss Marple was determined to see what lay beneath before another life was lost. Chapter 9. A pattern emerges. The soft glow of a single lamp illuminated Miss Jane Marple's parlour, casting gentle shadows across the chintz curtains and the polished table where her knitting lay abandoned. Outside, the night wrapped St. Mary Mead in a quiet embrace, the village's usual murmurs silenced by the hour. Miss Marple sat with a cup of tea, now grown cold, and a notebook open before her, its pages filled with her neat, spidery handwriting. The tragedy of Tom Harrow's death had stirred her mind into a quiet frenzy, and tonight she sought to weave the scattered threads of this mystery into a coherent pattern. The metal clip by the gate, the nicked boot print, the invoice for wire signed by Roland Blake, and the whispered accounts of Tom's observations, these were no mere fragments, but pieces of a deliberate design. She leaned back in her chair, her eyes half closed, her thoughts as precise as the stitches she so often crafted. The gate, with its deadly wires, was no accident, of that she was certain. Tom Harrow, with his quiet vigilance, had seen or heard something that made him a threat, and someone had ensured his silence with a ruthlessness that chilled her. She recalled a St. Mary Mead seamstress who had once unravelled a theft by noticing a single mismatched thread in a stolen shawl. Small things, Miss Marple knew, could reveal great truths, and the clues, in this case, were beginning to align. Her notes, spread across the table, were a map of connections. Roland Blake's name appeared again and again. Tom's sighting of him near the gate after dark, Stokes's account of his curious questions about wiring, Mrs. Dowling's distrust of his charm, and Sir Henry's guarded defence of his contractor. The invoice for wire, procured by Blake when it should have been Stokes's domain, was a particularly damning thread. Why would a contractor meddle in electrical supplies unless he had a purpose beyond his stated role? She thought of a village carpenter who had sabotaged a rival's work to secure a contract, his small act of tampering uncovered by a misplaced nail. Blake's ambition, she suspected, was the key to this crime. Miss Marple's mind turned to the gate itself, its frayed wires, a deliberate act of sabotage. Stokes had admitted to finding a loose wire days before Tom's death, attributing it to weather or animals, but his nervousness suggested he feared otherwise. Tom's daily checks, his unease about the gate's safety, and his sighting of Blake. Near it painted a picture of a man who had stumbled upon a secret. Ellen Harrow's words echoed in her memory. Tom had heard Blake and Sir Henry in whispered talks, their quick looks betraying a plot. Could Blake have rigged the gate to eliminate Tom, ensuring his silence and securing the lucrative stables? Contract. She tapped her pencil against the notebook, her thoughts drifting to Sir Henry. His bluster, his quickness to blame Stokes, and his unease when Blake's name arose suggested a man under pressure. The ledger on his desk, its pages in disarray, hinted at financial strain, a motive that might make him vulnerable to Blake's influence. She recalled a St. Mary Mead merchant who had fallen into debt, his desperation leading to a partnership with a swindler. Was Sir Henry's trust in Blake a similar misstep, or was he complicit in something darker? Mrs. Dowling's bitterness, too, could not be dismissed. Her grudge against the gate, her sharp words about Sir Henry, and her mention of Tom's sympathy suggested a woman whose pride might drive her to drastic action. Yet her frail frame and lack of technical skill made her an unlikely saboteur. Miss Marple thought of a village widow who had once spread poison in a rival's garden. Her spite, a weapon of words rather than wires. Mrs. Dowling's role, she suspected, was more witness than perpetrator. Her observations of Blake and Tom adding weight to the case against the contractor. Stokes, the nervous electrician, was another piece of the puzzle. His rushed work, his fear of blame, and his admission of Blake's involvement with the wire suggested a man caught in a web not of his making. She recalled a St. Mary Mead handyman who had been coerced into shoddy repairs by a bullying client, his fear silencing his protests. Stokes's trembling hands and evasive glances spoke of a similar pressure, perhaps from Sir Henry or Blake himself. Miss Marple rose, pacing slowly, to the window where the night pressed against the glass. The pattern was emerging, and Blake stood at its center. She theorized that he had rigged the gate, perhaps intending only to scare Tom, who had overheard his plans to inflate the stable's contract or manipulate Sir Henry. Tom's death, whether planned or not, had silenced a witness and created a scandal that could pressure Sir Henry into favoring Blake's bid. The metal clip, the invoice, the boot print, these were the physical traces of his scheme, and Miss Marple was certain they would lead to him. Yet proof was needed, something beyond the whispers and suspicions that filled her notebook. She thought of the gate, its wires now lifeless but still holding secrets. A return to the scene might yield more, perhaps a clue the police had overlooked. She resolved to visit the manor at dawn with Inspector Craddock's permission to examine the gate once more. She recalled a village baker who had found a stolen coin in a loaf, his careful inspection revealing a thief. The gate, she felt, would yield its own confession if she looked closely enough. Miss Marple returned to her chair, her tea untouched, her mind as clear as the night sky. The threads of this mystery: Blake's ambition, Sir Henry's strain, Mrs. Dowling's grudge, Stokes's fear, and Tom's quiet watchfulness, were weaving into a tapestry of deceit. In St. Mary Mead, as in life, the truth was often hidden in the smallest details, and Miss Marple was determined to find the one that would unravel Roland Blake's charm and expose the killer of Tom Harrow. Chapter 10. The final clue. The dawn broke over St. Mary Mead with a soft, reluctant light, the sky streaked with clouds that seemed to mirror the village's unease. Miss Jane Marple, wrapped in her green shawl, walked the familiar lane to Hawthorne Manor, her step steady despite the early hour. The air was cool, carrying the scent of dew and freshly turned earth, and the manor loomed ahead, its stone facade sombre under the grey morning. The iron gate, now stripped of its deadly current, stood cordoned off by a constable's rope, a silent testament to Tom Harrow's death. Miss Marple had arranged to meet Inspector Craddock at the scene. Her request couched in terms of neighbourly concern, but driven by a certainty that the gate held one final secret. Her mind, as sharp as the knitting needles left beside her parlour chair, was alive with the threads of this mystery. Roland Blake's persistent presences, nocturnal, lingering near the gate, his curious questions to Stokes, the invoice for wire, and the whispered talks with Sir Henry pointed to a man whose charm masked a dangerous ambition. The metal clip she had spotted in the grass, the nicked boot print, and Tom's troubled observations wove a pattern of deliberate sabotage. Miss Marple theorized that Blake had rigged the gate to silence Tom, who had overheard his scheme to inflate the stable's contract, securing his lucrative deal through fear and manipulation. Yet a single, undeniable clue was needed to tie Blake to the crime, and she felt certain the gate would yield it. Inspector Craddock was waiting by the gate, his overcoat damp with morning mist, his expression a mix of indulgence and curiosity. "Miss Marple," he greeted, tipping his hat, "you're up early. I hope you're not planning to solve my case for me." His tone was light, but his eyes held a flicker of respect, born of past encounters, where her quiet insights had outpaced his own. "Dear me, Inspector," she replied, her smile gentle, but her gaze sharp. "I only thought a fresh look at the scene might ease my mind. Poor Tom's death has troubled the village, and I find the morning air clears one's thoughts." Craddock nodded, stepping aside to let her approach the gate. The constable on duty, a young man with a nervous habit of adjusting his helmet, stood back, his eyes darting between them. The gate itself was a grim spectacle, its iron bars cold and unyielding, the wires now disconnected but still tangled at its base. Miss Marple's eyes scanned the ground, noting the churned mud where police boots had trampled, but her attention was drawn to a small patch of grass near the gate post, where the metal clip had caught her eye days before. It was gone now, likely, collected as evidence, but she crouched slightly, her shawl brushing the earth, and peered closer. There, half buried in the damp soil, was a tiny brass screw, no larger than a sixpence, its surface etched with the faint initials RB. Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her face remained serene. She straightened, gesturing to Craddock with the air of one pointing out a stray flower. "Inspector, might you have a look here? It seems a small thing, but one never knows." Craddock knelt, his brow furrowing as he retrieved the screw with a handkerchief. He held it to the light, squinting at the initials. "R.B. Relland Blake, I presume," he said, his voice tinged with surprise. "How did my men miss this? It's not much, but it's something." He slipped it into an envelope, his expression growing thoughtful. Miss Marple smiled faintly, her mind racing. The screw, likely from Blake's toolkit, was a tangible link to the contractor, a piece of evidence that placed him at the scene with intent. She recalled a St. Mary Mead jeweller who had been caught stealing gems when a tiny clasp, bearing his mark, was found in a pawned necklace. Small things, she knew, could undo the cleverest schemes. "It's curious, isn't it?" she said, her tone mild, "how such a small object can tell a story. Perhaps it fell from a tool used to tamper with the wires." Craddock's eyes narrowed, but he nodded. "We'll have it analyzed, see if it matches anything in Blake's possession. I've got my men searching his truck, today tools, papers, anything that might connect him to the gate." He paused, glancing at her. "You've a knack for this, Miss Marple. Anything else you've noticed?" She tilted her head, her gaze drifting to the gate's hinges, where a faint scratch marked the metal, as if something had been forcibly removed. Only that the wires seemed deliberately frayed, she said, not worn, but cut, as if someone meant for them to be dangerous. Tom was so careful. Inspector, his wife, and Mrs. Finch both said so. I can't help but think he was a threat to someone. Craddock's expression hardened. We found a wire with a clean cut, hidden under the insulation. Not whether or where someone knew what they were doing. If this screw ties to Blake, it's more than we had yesterday. He hesitated, then added, You're thinking Blake rigged it, aren't you, to get rid of Tom? Miss Marple's smile was disarming, but her eyes were keen. Oh, I leave the theorizing to you, Inspector. But Tom saw things, heard things perhaps, more than was safe. Mr. Blake's interest in the gate, his talks with Sir Henry, Dwyer. He supplied to Stokes it does make one wonder. Craddock grunted, slipping the envelope into his pocket. I'll have a word with Blake today, press him harder. If this screw came from his toolkit, he'll have some explaining to do. He gestured to the constable. Keep the area clear until we're done here. Miss Marple, will you walk back with me? As they moved down the Manor's drive, the gate receding behind them, Miss Marple's thoughts were a whirl of connections. The screw, with its incriminating RB, was the final clue she had sought, a link that tied Blake to the gate's sabotage. She pictured Tom, the quiet groundskeeper, overhearing Blake's plans, perhaps a scheme to inflate the stable's contract, or to pressure Sir Henry with the threat of scandal. Blake, she theorized, had rigged the gate to silence Tom, ensuring his silence and securing his deal. The metal clip, the invoice, the boot print, and now the screw formed a chain of evidence, each link forged by Blake's ambition. She thought of a St. Mary Mead baker who had once been caught poisoning arrivals' bread, his crime revealed by a single grain of arsenic found in a flour sack. Blake's crime, she felt, was no less deliberate, his charm a mask for greed. As they reached the lane, Craddock turned to her, his expression serious. You've given us a push, Miss Marple. If this screw checks out, we'll have Blake in for questioning by noon. I'm sure you'll do what's needed, Inspector, she said, her voice as gentle as ever. The truth has a way of coming out, doesn't it? As she walked back to her cottage, the village stirring to life around her, Miss Marple's mind was calm but resolute. The gate had yielded its secret, and Blake's facade was crumbling. In St. Mary Mead, as in life, the smallest clues, clip a screw, a whispered word could unravel the darkest deeds. And Miss Marple was certain that Tom Harrow's killer would soon face the light of justice. Chapter 11. The confrontation. The drawing room of Hawthorne Manor, with its heavy curtains and flickering firelight, seemed to close in around its occupants as the late afternoon sun dipped below the horizon. Miss Jane Marple sat quietly in a corner, her green shawl folded neatly in her lap, her presence almost overlooked amidst the tension that filled the air. Inspector Craddock had summoned the 4 suspects: Sir Henry Caldwell, Albert Stokes, Mrs. Clara Dowling, and Roland Blake to the manor for a final reckoning. His investigation sharpened by the tiny brass screw etched with RB that Miss Marple had spotted at dawn. The room, though grand, felt stifling, as if the weight of Tom Harrow's death pressed against its walls. Sir Henry stood by the mantel, his face flushed, his hands clasped behind his back as if to restrain his usual bluster. Stokes perched on the edge of a chair, his fingers twisting a handkerchief, his eyes darting nervously. Mrs. Dowling sat rigid, her black dress stark against the chintz upholstery, her lips set in a line of disapproval. Roland Blake, by contrast, lounged in an armchair, his smile as polished as ever, though Miss Marple noted a faint tightness at the corners of his mouth. A crack in his confident facade, Craddock stood at the centre of the room, his notebook closed, his expression one of grim determination. "Thank you for coming," he began, his voice steady but carrying an edge that silenced the room. "Tom Harrow's death was no accident. The gate's wires were deliberately tampered with, and we've found evidence that points to the truth. I want to lay it out clearly, and I expect honest answers." Sir Henry snorted, but his usual bravado was muted. "Get on with it, Inspector. I've got a manor to run, and this business is bad enough without dragging it out." Craddock's eyes flicked to him, then moved to the others. "We found a brass screw by the gate this morning, marked with the initials RB. It matches tools in Mr. Blake's truck, which we searched today. We also found a wire, deliberately cut and hidden under insulation, designed to deliver a fatal shock. Mr. Blake, you were seen near the gate after dark by Tom Harrow himself. Care to explain?" Blake's smile held, but his eyes hardened. "A screw, that's your evidence. I'm a contractor, Inspector. My tools are all over the manor. As for the gate, I've told you, I was just looking around, getting a feel for the estate. Tom must have been mistaken if he thought I was up to anything." Miss Marple, silent until now, spoke softly, her voice cutting through the tension like a needle through cloth. "Mr. Blake, Tom was a careful man, not given to mistakes. He told his wife he saw you examining the gate's wires, and Mr. Stokes mentioned your keen interest in how they worked. It's curious, isn't it, that you also supplied wire for the gate, when such matters were Mr. Stokes's responsibility." Blake's smile faltered, and he leaned forward, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. "Curiosity, Miss Marple, nothing more. I'm in the business of building, and I like to know how things work. As for the wire, I was helping Stokes out, saving him a trip. Nothing sinister in that." Stokes shifted, his handkerchief a crumpled mess. "I didn't ask for that wire, Inspector. Mr. Blake brought it, said it was the right kind. I used it, but I checked it myself, thought it was fine." Mrs. Dowling's eyes narrowed, her voice sharp. "Helping, were you? Tom thought it odd, you skulking about that gate. I saw you there myself once, all smiles and no good reason. You're no electrician, Mr. Blake." Blake's jaw tightened, but he forced a laugh. "Mrs. Dowling, your imagination is as lively as your tongue. I had no reason to harm Tom. He was a groundskeeper, not a threat to me." Miss Marple's gaze remained steady, her hands folded calmly, but Tom was a threat, wasn't he? He overheard things, saw things. Mrs. Harrow mentioned he heard you and Sir Henry in whispered talks, planning something in the study. Perhaps it was about the stable's contract, quite a lucrative deal, I understand, and with his quiet ways, might have heard too much. Sir Henry's face reddened, and he stepped forward, his voice rising. "That's enough, Miss Marple. I won't have my affairs dragged into this. Blake and I discussed business, nothing more. Tom was loyal, he wouldn't eavesdrop." Craddock raised a hand, his voice firm. "Sir Henry, let her finish. Miss Marple's got a way of seeing things we miss." His eyes flicked to her, a silent acknowledgement of her insight. Miss Marple continued, her tone as gentle as ever, but unyielding. "Tom was loyal, but he was observant. He saw you, Mr. Blake, at the gate, and he heard your plans perhaps too. Inflate the stable's contract, or to pressure Sir Henry with the threat of scandal. The gate was a perfect tool, wasn't it? Rig it to shock, perhaps only to frighten Tom into silence, but it went too far. The screw, the wire you supplied, the boot print with a nicked heel matching your shoes, it all points to you. Blake's smile vanished, his face piling. This is nonsense. A screw and a boot print. You've no proof, just village gossip and an old woman's fancies. His voice rose, but it lacked conviction, and Miss Marple noted the sweat beading on his brow. Craddock stepped closer, his eyes hard. We've more than fancies, Blake. The screw came from your toolkit, confirmed by the supplier's mark. The wire you gave Stokes was substandard, prone to fraying, deliberately chosen. I'd wager. And Tom's widow confirmed he saw you tampering with the gate. You rigged it to kill him, didn't you? To keep him from talking. Blake's hands clenched, his charm crumbling like dry plaster. I didn't mean to kill him, he burst out, his voice cracking. It was meant to scare him, that's all. He'd heard me talking to Sir Henry about the contract, how I'd pad the costs, make a fortune. He was going to tell, ruin everything. I fixed the gate to give him a jolt, make him back off. I didn't know it'd kill him. He slumped, his head in his hands, the confession spilling out like water from a broken dam. Sir Henry gasped, his cigar falling to the rug. You damned fool, Blake. You dragged me into this. My manor, my name. Mrs. Dowling's lips curled in disgust, while Stokes exhaled. His relief palpable. Miss Marple's voice was calm, cutting through the shock. Greed, Mr. Blake, is a poor architect. You built a trap, but it caught more than you intended. Her eyes, bright behind her spectacles, held no triumph, only a quiet sadness for the waste of a life. Craddock signalled to the constable at the door. Take him in, Jenkins. We'll sort the charges at the station. As Blake was led away, his shoulders slumped, the room fell silent, the fire's crackle the only sound. Miss Marple rose, her shawl in hand. A sad business, Inspector, she said softly, but the truth is out, and Tom can rest now. Craddock nodded, his expression weary but grateful. You've a gift, Miss Marple. We'd have got there, but you made it quicker. As she stepped into the hall, the manor's weight seemed to lift, though the shadow of Tom's death lingered. In St. Mary Mead, as in life, the truth could be buried, but never for long not, when there were those who knew where to look. Chapter 12. The village settles there. Soft light of early evening filtered through the lace curtains of Miss Jane Marple's cottage, casting delicate patterns across the polished floorboards of her parlour. Outside, St. Mary Mead was settling into its familiar rhythm, the village's lanes quiet save for the distant call of a black bird and the occasional creak of a passing cart. The tragedy of Tom Harrow's death, though still a fresh wound, was beginning to fade into the fabric of village life, as such shocks often did. Miss Marple sat by her window, her knitting needles clicking steadily, a pale blue shawl taking shape in her lap. The manor's iron gate, now dismantled and carted away, no longer cast its sinister shadow, but the truth it had revealed lingered in her thoughts. The village had buzzed with the news of Roland Blake's arrest, the story spreading like wildfire from the Red Lion to the post office, each retelling adding a flourish of indignation or triumph. Blake's confession, rung out in the manor's drawing room under Inspector Craddock's steady gaze and Miss Marple's gentle prodding, had laid bare his greedier plan to silence Tom Harrow, who had overheard his scheme to inflate the stable's contract, gone horribly awry. The brass screw marked RB, the frayed wire, the nicked boot print, and the invoice for unneeded wire had formed a net that Blake could not escape. Miss Marple, with her quiet observation, had tightened the threads until the truth emerged. She paused her knitting, her eyes drifting to the garden, where roses nodded in the evening breeze. The case, though resolved, left a familiar ache in her heart, not for the victory, but for the waste of a life. Tom Harrow, with his quiet diligence, had been no mere groundskeeper, but a man who saw too much, his loyalty to the manor his undoing. She thought of a St. Mary Mead baker who had once been ruined by a rival's sabotage, his trust betrayed by greed. Human nature, she mused, was much the same everywhere. Whether in a grand manor or a humble cottage, the door creaked open, and Lily, her maid, bustled in with a tray of tea, her face alight with the villagers' latest whispers. "Miss Marple, they're still talking about it at the shop," she said, setting the tray down. "Mr. Blake's locked up in Much Benham, and Sir Henry's gone quiet. They say Mrs. Dowling's telling everyone she knew Blake was trouble all along. And Mr. Stokes is back at his workshop, looking like he's aged a year." Miss Marple smiled faintly, pouring tea with a steady hand. "The village does love a story, Lily, but it's a sad one, for all that. Poor Tom deserved better." Lily nodded, her eyes wide. "They're saying you helped," Miss pointed the inspector right at Blake. "Is it true you found that screw by?" "The gate, oh, I only noticed a small thing," Miss Marple said, her tone dismissive but her eyes twinkling. "The police would have found it in time, I'm sure. Inspector Craddock is a thorough man." As Lily bustled out, Miss Marple's thoughts returned to the case. The screw, with its telltale RB, had been the final link. But it was Tom's quiet observations, shared with his wife, Mrs. Finch, and Mrs. Dowling, that had guided her. Blake's charm, Sir Henry's bluster, Stokes's nerves, and Mrs. Dowling's grudge had each played a part, but it was Tom's unseen presence, his habit of noticing what others overlooked, that had unravelled the truth. She recalled a village seamstress who had once solved a theft by spotting a single loose thread in a stolen cloak. Small things, she knew, were the key to great secrets. A knock at the door interrupted her reverie, and Inspector Craddock stepped in, his hat in hand, his face weary but warm. "Miss Marple," he said, settling into a chair at her invitation, "I owe you a debt." Blake's confessed, fully admitted he meant to scare Tom, not kill him, but it's murder all the same. The screw and the wire tied him to the gate, and your nudging got us there faster. Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her smile gentle. "You give me too much credit, Inspector. I only pointed out what was there to see. You and your men did the real work." Craddock chuckled, accepting a cup of tea. "You've a way of seeing what we miss, and don't pretend otherwise. That screw, the boot print, the way you got Blake to crag you the gift, and I'm grateful for it." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind her spectacles. "People are much the same, Inspector, whether in a manor or a cottage. They hide their secrets, but they leave traces, a word, a glance, a tiny screw. One only needs to look." Craddock nodded, sipping his tea. "Well, the village is quieter now, thanks to you. Sir Henry's keeping to himself, and Stokes is swearing he'll never rush a job again. Mrs. Dowling's already complaining about something new, but that's her way." Miss Marple laughed softly, her needles resuming their rhythm. "St. Mary Mead will always have its dramas, Inspector, but it's a good place for all that." As Craddock took his leave, promising to keep her posted on Blake's trial, Miss Marple turned back to her knitting, the shawl growing under her deft hands. The sun had set, and the village lay in darkness, its secrets laid bare for now. She thought of Tom Harrow, resting at last, and of the gate, no longer a threat. In St. Mary Mead, as in life, the truth could be buried, but not forever, not when there were those who knew where to look. Her needles clicked on, a steady counterpoint to the village's quiet. And Miss Marple's mind, ever alert, wondered what puzzle might next stir the peace of her little world.